Today, what I would like to do is start all this with what actually is open source. I've been working with computers for a very long time. I've learned programming when I was 11. Like, my dad got me into this. And I even studied at the technical university, and they didn't even tell us what is open source. We learned about licensing. All we learned was how to lock people down, what to disallow people, and so on. So then, as a developer and really passionate engineer, I played with things. I kind of tried, like, ooh, there are puzzles, there are tricky things, there are problems out there to be solved and tackled. And since, well, I needed a job while I was studying media computer science, I got involved in a company that develops systems for archives, like for mass digitization of audio content for broadcasters and large archives. Well, of course, this was not open source. And then I saw what did not work and what would be possible and the challenges we were facing. And then I stumbled over this. And then there are more things like these events here, where it's like open source here, open source there. And then I've been to events where people said they do open source, but then they said they didn't open source. It's a lot of confusion out there. So let's look at the common misconceptions. The major one is that a lot of people, and especially archiving institutions that I work with, they mistake open source with freeware. Oh, that's the stuff we don't have to pay anything for. No, that's why we use it. It's not because we want to use it. We would actually like to use the really, really expensive, cool stuff that all the other kids out there use, but we can't afford it because we're a library or we're a national archive and we only have public funding. So we go for the freeware. That's the open source. That's actually wrong. The second thing is that I very often, even from companies that produce open source software, they distinguish between commercial software and open source software. And outside of the preservation context, it's very often that when somebody says, oh yeah, you could use this open source tool, people go like, ooh, yeah, that's command line. That's like with, you have to type stuff. And it's really complicated, you cannot install it, and this is Linux system, I've heard, and it never works, and you only have problems with it, and we'll stay away from it because everybody else uses something with a window or an apple on it for some weird reason. Well, actually, it's about user freedom, so this means you, or I say you, and I might ask you to raise a hand who's not using a computing device ever at all. Okay, I would have expected at least one. My grandmother was really, really surprised when I told her that she's using a computer. She said, Peter, I've bought this new camera. Like, she takes a lot of pictures, and she goes, I don't know how this works. Like, it took me 2 years to figure out with this previous digital camera, now that everything's digital. But the delete button looks different. You studied computer science. Do this. Make it so that I am happy. Change it like it was before. And I said, I can't. And she said, what? What did we send you to school for? Like, you've learned this stuff. So change it. And I said, I can't. And she said, what is it with you? And I said, well, actually, it's closed. And she said, you can open it if you want to. Well, what I'm getting at is it's actually about freedoms people do not have when they use computing devices. Oh yeah, and then I told her that actually the digital camera was a computer, and then she was like really, really, really confused. So I won't use the term free software to add more confusion. So see, open source is actually free software in a different, like, it's just a different term. But since it's about user freedom, it's about the free as in free speech. And the definition is not, does it run on Linux? Do we have to put everything online and have everybody else write into our source code, and we have to allow everybody doing everything? No, 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 no. It's just 4 freedoms that define free software / open source. It's the freedom to use it for any purpose you want. It's the freedom to study it. This means you are allowed to understand things. You are allowed to be interested in how stuff works. I'm a passionate engineer. I take stuff apart all the time. Like, my parents and my friends and my grandparents and my whole environment, when I was a kid, they encouraged me to like ask questions, be interested, like go out there and do stuff and be innovative. And you know, this is what also the media tells me, like, we need more innovative power in the market, blah, blah, blah. Where should this come from if people cannot be interested? If you try to open something up to understand it, and then you get sued, or you try to open it up, it's like, it's glued together. I tried to pick apart a remote control for a VCR we had in the archive to modify it, because we had 3 VCRs from the same vendor, and there is no more rewind button on these devices anymore. So once the digitization process was finished, the operator went into the machine room, and she was like, oh my God, I have to rewind the tape now. After 4 hours of recording, there are 2 more running. If I press rewind on the remote control, all the others might rewind as well, and I lose hours of work. So I took apart this remote control, modified it. So we actually now have a wire and the LED attached so she can point at the device that she wants to rewind, and we can do a preservation job. I almost broke the remote control while taking it apart because it was glued together. So this is about studying, and that would also be the part, improve, like modifying things, and not only be allowed to modify things, but also be allowed to share these modifications with others. Like, if we are archives, and I know from working at the National Archive in Austria, the Mediathek, National Audiovisual Archive, it's always, budget is tight, so we have to be creative. And then when we meet other archives, it's really, really great if we can just say, oh, we figured this out, and they say, hey, we figured this out, and we just exchange stuff. So these 4 freedoms, that's what defines open source free software. That's it, nothing more. And I've made the experience that people say, yeah, so what? Oh no, my IKEA example, and now we're in Stockholm. Okay, many people I spend my days with are not computer guys. It's total fun talking about kernel debugging with brilliant people, but there's more out there. So I spend a lot of time with regular human beings, as we developers call them. And then they say, so it's open source, it means source. I'm not a developer, so what? What is it in for me? And I say, well, there are these freedoms, like I just explained. And then they say, yeah, so what? I'm not a developer. And I say, okay, imagine you buy a table from IKEA, and it's actually intended as a bedside table or a dining table. And it's this high and it's this color. But you just want to use it as your cool couch table and paint it in purple. Is it? Yeah, so? So you take this table, give it to somebody, or you can do it yourself. Like, you cut down the legs, you polish it, you paint it in pink, purple, green, whatever. And then I say, well, now imagine this would have been software. You would have neither been able to do this, nor you would have been allowed. And IKEA, I mean, imagine they walk up to you and they go like, oh, this is Knut, and Knut was never intended to be a bedside table or a couch table, so we will sue you and you will not be able to make these modifications. People go like, are you crazy? I bought this table and I wanted to modify it, and this is perfectly normal. Every building we live in that is older than a few years has undergone modifications. My bathroom at home, I live in an apartment that's like 100 years old. In Vienna, it's very common. If it would be software where I live in, I would have to find the original manufacturer of this building or bathroom and get their allowance and their guys to change something if I want to have different tiles. I want to modify my bathtub. I think you get the idea. I hope you get the idea. And in the software world, this is completely the opposite. It's the exception that you have these basic freedoms that we consider taken for granted in the real world. We're not only taking them for granted, actually, we need them to do stuff with our environment. So this weird guy, me, he's talking about stuff. But what is all in this for long-term preservation? And I would like to clarify, what do we mean with long-term? 10 years, 100 years, longer. Who's for 10 years? Okay? More? That's 100 years? 100 years, more? Who's in for more than 100 years is long-term? Okay, other way around, who thinks, no, long-term should be something reasonable? Okay, I was at the end presentation of a long-term preservation university project with a network of excellence. The question from the audience was, what did you consider as long-term? There was an uncomfortable feeling on stage, and they said, well, we didn't go into this, we didn't really clarify this, we didn't really want to, 3 to 5 years. Why? Because they were not able to go beyond this scope, because this is what the typical product lifetime on the market nowadays is when we speak about software. Well, this is what my colleague told me when I started in archiving. He said, we're thinking about long-term, we're serious, this is infinity. And to be sure, we'll add 1 day. And I was like, yeah, I remember in math, you have this n plus 1, and then you have like, if you go for n and n plus 1, then you go for infinite plus 1. So this is, when I say long-term, I mean this. And I use heavy words like virtual immortality. Imagine, you're working on an archive. I used to work with, no, I'm working with audiovisual archives, and there's always the problem with hardware. So what about the replayers? We need to fix stuff. We need to get spare parts. We need to modify things. I've done so many installations of audio digitization systems in broadcasting environments. I've hardly ever seen any replayer machine that wasn't modified. It's like these studio equipment things. Now, apply these 4 freedoms of free software to the real world. In theory, you could actually take the source code. That would be the schematics of your replayer and recording device, of any equipment you need. And also the building components, because software is only text. It's an idea that you can compile and then it becomes alive. It's a pretty weird creature. So imagine you could archive your replayer, including the schematics, including the building components, are allowed to exchange it with others. So if one archive says, oh, we still have this, here you go, because now we both have it. It's software, we can copy it. We don't have to stick with the limitations of physical object, like, I'm really sorry, I cannot give the microphone to you because otherwise I wouldn't have it. And an important part for me, thinking about long-term preservation, is make it work under future conditions. Things change. Software changes fast. I deal with this all day, and I have a really hard time keeping up with what changes every day. Like, I learned something, I understood something, half a year later or a year later, it's like completely outdated. But, you're using Windows 7? So making it work under future conditions, in order to be able to do so, in order to be able to fulfill the job of long-term preservation, I think these 4 freedoms really play well in our case. Well, if what I'm saying is true, shouldn't we actually see something else when we walk out there? Why isn't free software, open source, more widely used? Why is it so that it's the exception? It's like this weird thing the weird people use that have no money, or that developers are really, they really love it because they can command line and hack stuff. Well, actually, I usually don't use pictures, but I couldn't refuse this one. It's a chicken egg problem. And why is the mouse cursor? Mouse cursor gone. So it's a chicken-egg problem. It's not a problem by definition. A major thing is that a lot of people think something that is free, as we don't have to pay for it, can be worth anything. Like anybody could have it. We want the good stuff, and the good stuff usually has to be so expensive that we can go to conferences and brag with others, go like, we've got the good stuff and you don't. And if they say, well, yeah, but it's open source, we can all download it, it's like, damn. At the Technical University, they sent out an email when Microsoft changed the license conditions for Office, so the students did not get an Office license anymore under student conditions. They did not understand that they were dependent on something and that a vendor could just go for changing the rules at any time they like. They said, oh, dear students, now you have to use the cheap stuff, this OpenOffice. We're really sorry. So price equals quality. I certainly question this, and you should as well. Graphical user interface is quality. As I said, many people think that open source is like just command line or weird tools that are made by developers who have no sense of how to make a usable program. It's partially true. Very important in our domain is that professionals are using something else, but there are other reasons than the license for them doing this. These are market dynamics and also politics. Ongoing support, this is an important issue. Like if somebody downloads free software from the internet, whom to call, whom to blame. And whom to blame is very important because who is responsible for what. I know a lot of people who say, we will not do something that others don't. We will not use something that others don't, because if something goes wrong, we're to blame. We have to take the responsibility. About price equals quality. It doesn't. It used to in the physical world up to some part, but once you've seen designer clothes and the quality, and if they make it in sweatshops in India, you know that quality doesn't equal price. It equals perception. You can get buggy and really great software for any price under any license. So something I would like to even honor with its own slide is that quality is price and license independent when we are speaking about software. Bless you. So, professional versus free. I've just put up some examples that might relate to our domain. As I said, I work mainly in the audiovisual domain. So, professionals don't use software, let alone make free software or open source. Well, the BBC even has its own website where they explain why they do make free software, why they use free software, and projects they have published under free licenses, and how they're actually using it in-house. So BBC is a really good role model for this, because they say, if we got public funding, we should put it into public solutions, if possible. Then there's, for example, GlusterFS. This is a network file system that is now maintained by Red Hat. And in the Mediathek in Vienna, we've used this for our storage now. And when I suggested to use this, then, of course, management said, well, but who else is using this? I did some research, and well, there's a small video on Vimeo that says, oh, we're really happy to have GlusterFS and I, Frankenstein, in our Hollywood movie production. So much for professionals not using free software. OpenEXR, talking about industrial light and magics, like you probably know Star Wars. This movie production, they made their own format because they were not happy with the existing film formats, and they've published it, and it's completely open source free software. And the Linux system, of course, which was already mentioned before, well, there's the internet, and the internet would not even exist without the basis and the foundation being free software. When you open a website, it's very, very likely that actually it runs on a Linux server. Most of the embedded devices you have run on some flavor of something that's based on these kinds of free operating systems. Take a Mac, for example. Actually, a lot of the Mac is based on free software. And if you dig in, you will find the text files that actually mention that, oh yeah, this code was written by someone else on the BSD license. But people don't care. So professional versus free, I hope to give some approach to this. Now, what about dependence, independence? Because when we're speaking about long-term, things will change, our environment will change. Companies, people, solutions, products, whatever, they will come and go. Now, the archival domain, we're a relatively small domain. That's like a niche market. No, it's not like a niche market. It is a niche market. If we need something to digitize video properly, and I go to companies that produce video digitization software, and I said, well, what about interpolation or this and that? And they said, like, nobody ever asked this question. Please buy our product. At the Mediatek, we ran into a software problem with an analog digital video converter by accident. And it produced a visual artifact where you had two fields, like an image when you have it in cinema, in classical film, it's like one image, one frame. And in video, you have like two, like this, interlaced into each other. Long story short, we saw there was something going on with the video signal that was not actually in our intention as preserving the original, because we knew it was not in the original. So we came up with something to be able to test this. We used a lot of open source tools because we have to make something that doesn't exist. We needed a testing procedure for analog digital video converters. And then we found what went wrong, and actually it was a problem in the software of this device. And then the vendor said, yeah, we don't care, because everybody else is using this device for something else and not for preservation. Please move on. And this is just one example of many examples. I could stand here all day, bring you examples out of the real world where we ran into issues like this that just were like, you're not our main target audience. We're sorry. So off-the-shelf products often focus on something else. We can use this for archiving, and it might be good, but it might not be. It might even be do something that we don't want. And because we have highly specialized demands. So there's a small group of people doing stuff for long-term preservation if you compare it to the rest of products being offered. So there's a high risk of vendor dependence. Now, going back to free software and these four freedoms, people don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can use existing solutions. Developers can use existing solutions, and you can just say, okay, but we want it differently, and then you can change stuff or make these changes happen. There's a free choice of support and suppliers. If some company says, we're really sorry, but we're moving somewhere else, you can stick with your stuff. You can go to someone else and say, okay, here's the code, here's the stuff, please keep this alive. It's all a question about how to motivate the people, and I will get to this in a second. It's not a black box. If something doesn't work, for example, with formats, interoperability issues, so much black box testing that we have to do that can be really tricky up to the point where it's impossible to fix things. No black boxes with free software. If you find a problem, you can make somebody fix it, not have an infinite number of workarounds, or like, oh yeah, actually this program doesn't really do this, or it has a bug, but if you click here and then hold this, and then you do this, and now you need another finger, and then actually you can do this. I've seen so many workarounds because the software just couldn't be changed. That's not necessary with free software open source. One thing that we've experienced when we developed the video digitization solution for the National Archive in Vienna was we could use existing code that has a user base. So people are using stuff for something completely different, and we also use it, and now we have a common denominator. And if you think in building blocks and Lego, you have a lot of Lego blocks that are very commonly used, and some that are very special. But if you build something, it's very likely that lots of parts of it are actually made out of building blocks that are common with others. So we were able to exchange. When we found a problem, we were not alone because we were doing preservation. We had a free software that was used for something else, and thousands of people were using this virtual dub, for example, a video capture program. And suddenly we had help. We had people out there that had no clue and were not interested in preservation. But we could make things happen. And another very important point is less forced upgrades. I've been working in companies where we've developed something, we've tested it, we've delivered it, and we knew it works. And then a company of some component that we third-party licensed said, okay, you cannot use this anymore. So we had to upgrade everything. We could not decide when, how, or if. We had to. And this is also not the case with free software. If you want to stick with a tool forever, you can. It's like with Shellux. If you can keep this thing alive, you can use a gramophone, and this makes it possible to do the same with software. So the next step, I've said the perception of free software open source is, ooh, it's this free stuff that's not as good as the professional stuff, but also that this is not license dependent. So the professionalization of free software would be the next step. This means put your money where your mouth is. Because with proprietary software, every user is a customer. Every customer is resources coming in. The more people I have using my software, the more resources I have coming in, the more money I have to spend on development, improvement, support. With free software, the more users I have, the more people I have probably complaining about, because no software is ever perfect or bug-free. And they just go like, yeah, it can't do this, it can't do that, but I will not give you any resources to fix it. Yay! So think about the best of two worlds. You get these freedoms, and in many cases, something has to be done anyway. Some solution, some product has to be bought anyway. Archives will not research and development stuff and build things and not be able to maintain this. I mean, if they are, it's cool, but very unlikely. So if something proprietary would be the only option, you could actually go like, okay, what are the costs? Like, do the math. Check, what are also the ongoing costs? And then you can talk to another archive with the same needs. And you can go like, if we both pool our resources, we will both have it. We don't have to pay it twice, we only have to pay it once. So now this allows team play, teamwork, and pooling of resources. And all the changes and improvements that are made can actually be put upstream. Now that's a word that we developers use every day. Good morning, upstream. Hello, upstream. It just means the source of the program, whoever is the authoritative source where you download it, not source code, like it's like the official website or something. And you make a change, and you don't have to have this change only in-house. If you make it upstream, the changes that are made for an institution can go back up in this program, and so everybody else who downloads it, and also you in the future, has the change and improvements already in there. So that's upstream, that changes go upstream. You can make things so that they are designed for your use cases. You can go and say, okay, this is my use case, and I want it exactly like this. In cases where this has been done correctly, it has shown that the overall costs were less for the features gained, less workarounds, less frustration, and so on. If done correctly, if you just download something and go like, okay, there's this freeware stuff, and we'll see how far we can go, you will not get happy. And the last point about the benefits is something that I personally think would be a good thing. It's like, it's public money. It's all our money put together. It should not be privatized. It's like, hey, cool, we have a park. Let's privatize it. So we cannot have this park anymore. Let's build fences around it and sell it out. It's public money. So if possible, it might be a good thing to put it into public solutions that are then available again to the public who actually paid it. Now, how to do this? One thing is, you can download a program for free, and you can also say like, okay, if it would have been a shareware. Like, if I would have had to pay for it, I would have done it. So why not pay if I don't have to pay for it? This is a really weird concept in our society these days, because we're like, I don't have to pay for it. Of course I don't pay. I'm not stupid. But you hurt yourselves. There are people offering you chances. There are people offering you freedom in terms of you can choose. You've got control over an environment that you now more and more depend on. Try spending 1 week at work without software. Try one day. We'll see how much coffee you can consume trying not to do anything. We've had this problem when our internet went down, that we couldn't work anymore. It's the fact these days. It's problematic. So technology, we depend on it, and you would want this to work in a way that you want it, that's like in your interest. These freedoms are for you. They're not for the developers, they're for you. So if you pay for installation, pay for integration, rather than just not. It seems like I'm selling something, but still it's a freedom of choice, and just decide. But what I'm offering you is information, like this is possible. Software can be a bi-directional thing. You don't have to be the user to go like, please, dear vendor, dear developer, we will kill chicken or lambs or do strange rituals to fulfill our wishes in the next release. No, you actually can go like, please, developer, I can pay you. How much do you want? It's as easy as this. And if they say, no, I don't care, you can go like, but it's free software. I'll go and hire someone else. So if you say, we won't do the money thing. No, never. Or if you say, well, only a bit. There's also a lot of stuff that's non-financial that would be helpful, also as part of the Performer project. It's like testing things, providing feedback, writing documentation. There are a lot of people writing blogs out there, go like, oh, if you want to do this and that in Photoshop, then here's how you do it. Why not do this for free software? Because a lot of people go like, if I now use this other Office thing, where to go to? If I search on the web, do I find stuff? So there are a lot of things people can do. Regular human beings, as we call the users, can contribute to this whole ecosystem that we all live in. So sometimes I'm being asked like, okay, so now I'm completely lost, whom to ask. I put the Free Software Foundation Europe here. Please do not mistake it with the Free Software Foundation US. This is the European version. We're more civilized. I've been working with this organization for years now because, as you probably have figured by the time, I really think that free software is a good thing. Not because I'm very religious, but because I like fixing problems. I like developing stuff. I like doing things. So the logical consequence was free software. So the Free Software Foundation, they're not developers. They're people you can just go to and go like, oh, we have a question, and we are interested in this free software open source thing. Please, what? For example, this is how I got to know the Performer people. They had a question about licensing and implementations on a container format for audiovisual content. And they asked the Free Software Foundation Europe, and then it ended up on my table. And you see, so this is like an information hub. You can contact the maintainer or any developer or anybody involved in a free software project that you find interesting, that you go like, okay, this is actually could be interesting, but we need some changes in there. How much time do I have?
Another 20 minutes.
Ooh. Huh. Yeah, I will not use up the whole time. I will just, so you can ask a maintainer of any project. You can just go like, okay, we would need this and that. And it's like with speaking with any other human being. You just go like, hello, my name is. And they're not evil. They're sometimes a bit tricky because, no, they're not. No, they're not. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. I'm just saying this because very often you hear like, okay, I can't talk to developers. I'm not a developer. I'm like, yeah, but you can talk to me, and I'm a developer. And they're like, oh, yes. And I said, well, then you can talk to others as well. And now there are more and more companies that do free software, open source development and integration. and you can, of course, approach them. So one real-world example I would like to present is also part of the formats that are now implemented in the Performer project. Not because of me, but because of the properties it has. So there's a lossless video codec FFV1. Who of you does not know what a video codec is? Never heard the word, doesn't mean anything. Because if they're, for everybody it's clear what a codec is and what a video container is and stuff like this. Or are you just too afraid? You're shaking your head. That's like a short explanation. If you have a digital video, then you have the file ending, which is like AVI, MKV, MOV, and people go like, oh yeah, we have an MP4 file because it says .mp4. We have an AVI file because it says .avi. That's just a container. And inside this, you have the video information, you have the audio information, you have metadata information. And the way that the video signal is stored in a way so that computers can keep it and also present it to you as an image, it's called a codec. And it applies to basically any data that you store in digital form. And a lossless codec is a codec that you can compress with losslessly. So it's like a zip file. You put files in there, you unpack it, you pack it, you unpack it, you unpack it. You could do this infinitely and will not lose a bit. If you, for example, take a JPEG or an MP3, you open it, you don't change anything, you save it. You open it, you save it. You don't change anything, it will get worse, 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 worse. That's the typical compression used for audiovisual material because of the vast sizes that we have. What am I talking about? It's the National Archive of Austria wanted to digitize video for long-term preservation. They're serious about it. Remember? Infinity plus one. So the chief of the technical department said, we want to do lossless compression or uncompressed. Uncompressed was too expensive. It was not an option for several reasons. So we were looking for lossless compression. There are not many formats that can do this and that can do it properly, and that will fulfill the requirements of long-term preservation. Now, we asked around at conferences, at meetings, whoever we knew, we asked around, what are other people doing with these requirements? Even the Library of Congress said, yes, we do lossless preservation, but we use the lossy MPEG-2 copy for editing because we cannot actually open the lossless files now, but we're pretty sure we can do in the future. So we were not too happy with this because we said, well, we're not the Library of Congress. If they can open the files now, how should we? So I did some research. I stumbled over this weird thing called FFV1, which is a tongue breaker in any language that I speak, which is just two. But it was open source. It was free software. And it was excellent in the initial tests. And we said, but we want more. We want it faster. We want to have error sustainability, like some tweaking. It's already a good base to start from. So what we did, we used the 4 freedoms. We said, it's free software. We can use, study, share, and improve it. Seriously, let's go for this. And management decided they will take the allocated budget for a proprietary alternative where there actually was no choice. There was only one product on the market at that time which produced files that caused a lot of problems, and they still cause a lot of problems these days. So we used the 4 freedoms, contacted the developer, raised some money, and actually we spent less than with buying the proprietary solution, and we had so much money left over that we could even pay a developer to construct a whole digitization workflow system and also improve this codec. So that's pretty cool bang for your buck. Now, these improvements were in progress, and what then happened is the project forked. Forking means that developers disagree, and they say, well, we've been working together for quite some time now, but I think our ways will part because we will never get over the differences that we have. Fork. Now you have 2 projects that origin from the same code. And then they will go separate ways, and who knows where they will go. I was shocked because we just had this FFV1's improvement as work in progress. They were upstream in FFmpeg, but now the libav developers were not happy with FFmpeg. They're like, oh my God, what will happen? Well, it's free software. I just approached them and I said, here is a patch. And it's, and then they said, okay. So they took the changes we made in FFmpeg, incorporated it in libav, and we were able to continue. And this means that today we have a state where the changes and improvements we've made are in both projects and are maintained by these projects. So that's free software in action. The result was FFV 1.3, FFV 1 version 3, which is faster. It can now decode multi-threading. I've used it for full HD in real-time color grading on my home computer, which is not so special. Not so fast, I mean. And it's also error-aware. So we've done some pretty cool things to this codec. Actually, we didn't. We just asked someone else to do, and we paid him. And we published this, and we talked about this. So other archives got interested in this. And I remember when someone from the UK National Archives asked me, and he said, oh, I've read about this FFV1 codec, and we would really be interested in your experience with it. So we published it, we wrote it down, and I never heard of them again. And then some guy who's associated with BBC said, oh yeah, you know that the National Archives is using this codec now. And I said, well, wow. And I said, yeah, they asked the BBC to just give them the files, and the BBC, since they're using open source and they're not scared of using FFmpeg, they just said, okay. So it just worked. It worked so well that they didn't even have to ask again. And then I met them in London, and they were really happy not having all the issues that the other players with the industry-proposed format have. So that's a pretty cool, happy ending. Talking about ending, I'm landing. It's the performance rule. I would really like to highlight that it's a cool thing that Performa team decided to take openness seriously. Otherwise, they would have gone for audiovisual preservation formats used in broadcast, as everybody else is doing. No. They are deciding to make a conformance policy checker for actually, except for the TIFF thing, that's another issue. But for the audiovisual, it's now a policy checker for really accessible open formats. And as part of this, now the resources are provided to standardize FFV1 as a codec. I didn't mention this. It's not a standard. Standards is a hell lot of work and usually a hell lot of money. And when we used this codec at the National Archive, people said, it's not a standard. Somebody wrote it. He might even be crazy or a killer, or you don't know. You cannot use this format seriously. National Archive, hello? How unprofessional is this? And then we said, but we have the source code and the license that allows us to use study, share, and improve it. So basically, this is virtually immortal by definition. We don't need it to be a standard to be able to guarantee we can open or transcode it in the future. So that's why we used it. But other institutions said, no, we have to have a standard. This is now work in progress as part of the Performa project. And it gives the whole thing more credibility. Because how do you judge software? How do you judge the quality of software? How heavy is it? Didn't really work. I tried it, doesn't work. How many USB sticks or how big it is? It's also no criteria. It's really hard to judge the quality of software. Even if you look at the source code, you can't. Okay, you can. But many people go like, okay, I will use what the others are using. If they didn't have problems, I'll go with this. Because it's about how much do you believe in this is good or not. So this is very good that it adds to the credibility of these formats. Because technically they're good. And now they're also getting the rest missing bits and pieces for the perception part in. It greatly reduced skepsis among users and vendors because they said, well, if others also agree with this is an option for long-term preservation, actually it might be. And they've done their homework. They've checked all the licensing and all the things. They really did their homework. And what I really like is that if this goes through, and I mean the results we can already see now with the 3 conformance checkers, what already exists is quite impressive. So this might inspire projects in the future that would have previously gone, but nobody's ever done this before. We'll not be the first to try. And now with the Performa project, afterwards people go like, oh yeah, there's people that already did this and it worked really well. So let's also do this because the outcome was amazing. You don't have to read this, and I put it in fine print because there are many tools out there that are free software, open source, that are used by many archives around the globe. Like Again, those are very much audiovisual stuff, tools, but it's not 3, it's not 4, it's not 20, it's not even, if I really was serious about this list, I'd have probably 20 slides plus about tools that are in use in long-term preservation, that are professional and under a free software license. Yeah, so it's a growing ecosystem. And the more of these puzzle pieces we have, the more fun it is to play in our playground. That's the last one. We archives have common interests in terms of somebody told us that we're responsible to preserve stuff. And as we heard in the introduction speech today, this is important if we want to maintain a civilized society. Now, these interests come with certain tasks, which sometimes mean challenges. So we have common interests, and if we have common challenges, why not go for common solutions? Thank you very much.